The late afternoon sun in Willow Creek, Oregon, painted Riverbend Park in hues of gold and amber. Children's laughter drifted on the gentle breeze, merging with the rhythmic crunch of joggers' shoes on the trails and the distant murmur of families enjoying picnics under the ancient oaks. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, this wasn't just a park. It was her sanctuary, a civil rights attorney whose days were a relentless battlefield of legal briefs and courtroom drama. These stolen moments with a thick hardcover book were her lifeline. Her silent protest against a world often too loud and too unfair. She craved peace, a rare commodity in her life, yet she was about to discover just how fragile that peace could be. Evelyn was deep into her reading, the quiet hum of the park a comforting backdrop, when a sharp screech of tires ripped through the tranquility. A police cruiser, pristine and imposing, skidded to a halt near the curb, immediately drawing curious glances from a few onlookers. Two officers emerged, their expressions stern, radiating an almost aggressive authority. Their eyes, like magnets drawn to iron, locked on to Evelyn, the only person sitting alone and, notably, a black woman in a predominantly white park. "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" one officer called out, his voice belonging to the older, jaded-looking Officer Miller, carrying an undeniable edge of suspicion rather than concern. Evelyn, unperturbed, glanced up from her book, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Of course," she replied, carefully closing her book. This was routine, she thought, a simple inquiry. She had no idea the world was about to shift beneath her. The second officer, younger and clearly eager to impress, stepped closer. This was Officer Davis. His tone was clipped, accusatory. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Evelyn's eyebrow arched in genuine puzzlement. "Suspicious activity? I'm just sitting here reading," she said, holding up her book as if it were the most obvious proof in the world, but their scrutiny didn't waver. "Can we see some ID?" Miller demanded, his voice hardening. Evelyn's pulse quickened. This wasn't routine. This was an interrogation. "I don't understand. What's the reason for this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing unease. "It's routine," Davis asserted, though his body language screamed otherwise. A small crowd began to gather, their murmurs a low hum. Some looked curious. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the imbalanced power dynamic at play. Evelyn sighed, a practiced calm washing over her, a trick she'd learned from countless tense courtrooms. She reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet. As she handed over her driver's license, Miller took it, scanning the information with unnecessary intensity. "Evelyn Reed," he read aloud almost mockingly. "What's your business here, Miss Reed?" Evelyn inhaled deeply, fighting to keep her patience intact. "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park. Is that a problem?" Miller's lips tightened. "We'll see." He handed her ID back, but instead of walking away, they continued to hover, their questions becoming less like an inquiry and more like a badgering. "Do you always carry a book like that around?" Miller sneered, gesturing dismissively at her hardcover. "Are you alone here or waiting for someone?" Davis added, his hand resting conspicuously on his belt. Evelyn had handled countless tense situations in court, but this was different. The power dynamic was stark, and their tone carried an edge she recognized all too well. The casual dismissal of dignity, the subtle threat. Still, she chose her words carefully, leaning on her deep understanding of the law. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," she stated firmly. Her refusal, a simple assertion of her rights, seemed to ignite something in them. Miller stepped forward, his face contorting. "Don't get smart with us," he snapped. "We're just doing our job." And I know the law," Evelyn countered, her voice steady. "I'm not breaking it by sitting in a public park." But reason was clearly not on their agenda. Miller reached for her arm, his grip surprisingly tight. "You're resisting," he declared, even though Evelyn hadn't moved an inch. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, startled. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, bolder. A young woman, Maya, pulled out her phone, its camera light blinking. "Stop resisting," Miller repeated, louder this time, as if performing for the growing audience. Evelyn's heart raced as she felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around her wrists. Humiliation and frustration burned in her chest, but she held on to her composure. The officers led her toward their cruiser, ignoring the shocked questions from onlookers. Evelyn turned her head, locking eyes with Maya, who was still recording. For a moment, an unspoken exchange passed between them, a silent plea to document the injustice unfolding. As the car door slammed shut, Evelyn knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Inside the cramped, sterile backseat of the police cruiser, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the police radio and the rhythmic thud of the tires on the asphalt. Evelyn stared out the window, her reflection merging with the passing blur of trees and houses. Her wrists ached, the cold steel digging into her skin, a constant physical reminder of the surreal absurdity of the last few minutes. She, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a civil rights attorney who had spent years defending clients, standing up for justice, and meticulously navigating the labyrinthine legal system, was now on the other side of the bars. The irony, a bitter, acidic taste in her mouth, threatened to overwhelm her, but there was no humor in it, only a burning, incandescent rage. At the station, things only got worse. The booking process was invasive, humiliating, designed to strip away every shred of dignity. Her fingerprints were taken, her photo snapped, her eyes forced to stare into the harsh, unblinking lens. Then she was led to a small holding cell. The fluorescent lights hummed relentlessly, casting a sickly pallor on the cold, concrete bench. "Enjoy your stay," she heard Officer Miller say, his voice laced with smug satisfaction as the cell door clanged shut. Evelyn sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, replaying the events at Riverbend Park over and over. How had such a peaceful moment spiraled into this humiliating nightmare? The answer, as chilling as it was clear, slammed into her: prejudice. It wasn't about what she did, it was about who she was, and the assumptions that came with it. Hours crawled by before anyone acknowledged her again. Finally, a young officer approached the cell, clipboard in hand. "Miss Reed, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he said flatly. "On what grounds?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You can discuss that in court," he replied, turning away dismissively. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think strategically. The charges were flimsy, she knew it, but she also knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like hers rarely were. Eventually, she was released on bail. As she walked out of the station, the cool night air hit her like a wave, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. Her colleague and friend, Marissa, was waiting by the curb, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Evelyn, are you okay?" Marissa rushed over. Evelyn nodded, though her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. "I'm fine," she said, the word feeling hollow. As they drove away, Marissa kept glancing at her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Evelyn broke the suffocating silence. "I'm not letting this slide, Marissa. Not this time." Marissa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What are you thinking?" I'm tired of this happening," Evelyn replied, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back, and I will." That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and open books. She worked tirelessly, outlining a civil rights lawsuit against Officer Miller, Officer Davis, and the Willow Creek Police Department. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a simmering determination. She knew the path wouldn't be easy. Her own law firm, known for its polished reputation, was initially hesitant. "Evelyn, a public case like this could overshadow our carefully cultivated image," her managing partner had gently warned. But Evelyn didn't flinch. Calmly but firmly, she explained that this fight wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. It was about ensuring that the next person, perhaps someone without her legal acumen or resources, wouldn't suffer the same fate. The world outside her apartment was already changing. The video of her arrest, shared by the brave young woman Maya, had gone viral. It wasn't just views. It was a phenomenon. People from all walks of life reached out with messages of support, sharing their own harrowing stories of injustice at the hands of those sworn to protect. Evelyn's resolve grew stronger with every email, every phone call, every comment. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. Reporters called constantly, asking for interviews, but Evelyn turned them all down. She wasn't interested in media attention. Her focus was laser-sharp on building a case that would not only hold the officers accountable, but also expose the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist. In the quiet of the night, however, when the world outside fell silent, the weight of the situation crept in. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the dismissive tone, the cold handcuffs, the murmurs of the crowd. She thought about how easily things could have escalated further, how many others hadn't been so fortunate. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also fueled her determination. It was a stark reminder of the mistakes often made by those in power, and the devastating consequences for those without it. One evening, as she sifted through stacks of research, Marissa stopped by with takeout. Evelyn barely looked up from her laptop as Marissa placed the food on the table. "You've been at this for hours," Marissa said gently. "I don't have a choice," Evelyn replied without missing a beat. Marissa sat across from her, studying her face. "You know, this is bigger than just a legal battle, right? People are looking to you now." Evelyn closed her laptop, finally meeting her friend's gaze. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I can't afford to lose." Her preparation was meticulous. She combed through similar cases, pulling precedents and gathering evidence to dismantle the officers' claims. She enlisted the help of trusted colleagues, building a legal team that shared her passion for justice. But it wasn't just about the courtroom. Evelyn also made it a point to engage with the community. She attended town halls, listened to others who had experienced similar injustices, and even spoke at the local Willow Creek Community College about the importance of accountability. One afternoon, while walking to her car after a meeting, a stranger approached her. "Dr. Reed?" the woman asked hesitantly. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice cracking, "for standing up to them, for standing up for all of us." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She managed a small smile. "I'm just doing what I can." The community's support was a double-edged sword. It empowered her, but it also heightened the pressure. She couldn't let them down. Then one day, her attorney called with news. The officer she was suing had filed a motion to dismiss the case. Evelyn expected as much. It was a standard move to delay the process. But as her attorney explained the next steps, she froze. "Evelyn," he said cautiously, "you should know something else. You've been assigned as the judge for one of their cases next month." The irony was staggering, a sudden, unexpected plot twist that sent a jolt through her. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, processing the revelation. She had spent weeks preparing to fight these officers in court, and now fate had handed her an entirely different kind of justice. For a moment she wondered if she could do it, if she could sit on that bench and remain impartial. But then she thought about everything they had put her through, about the people depending on her to make a stand. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to show what real justice looked like, an opportunity to not just fight for justice, but to dispense it. The courtroom was buzzing with quiet murmurs as people filed in, finding their seats, unaware of the profound personal drama about to unfold. The stage was set, not just for a legal proceeding, but for a moment that would redefine accountability in Willow Creek. The news from her attorney hit Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. Yet it wasn't fear or defeat that settled over her, but a cold, calculated surge of adrenaline. "Evelyn," he had said, his voice hesitant, "you've been assigned as the judge for one of their cases next month." The "there" hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. It was Officer Miller and Officer Davis, the very men she was preparing to sue for her wrongful arrest. She had spent weeks, no, months, meticulously building her civil rights case, poring over precedents, outlining arguments, fueled by a righteous anger that had simmered into an unyielding resolve. Her kitchen table had become a war room, littered with legal pads and highlighted statutes. Every late night, every canceled social event, every weary sigh was an investment in reclaiming her dignity and fighting for the countless others who couldn't. Her determination was a shield against the weariness, a fire against the cold injustice. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about tearing down a wall of systemic bias, brick by painful brick. She had envisioned the confrontation in court. Her, the plaintiff, facing them across the aisle, armed with facts and legal precedents. But now, this. The irony was staggering. A sudden, unexpected plot twist that sent a jolt through her very core. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly, processing the revelation. Her mind raced, sifting through the implications. Was it a setup? A cruel joke? Or something far more profound? She had spent her career advocating before judges. Now, she was to be one, holding the scales of justice in her own hands for the very men who had so casually stripped her of her freedom and dignity. For a moment, a fleeting, treacherous thought, she wondered if she could do it. Could she sit on that bench, look into their eyes, and remain impartial? Could she truly separate the raw personal wound from the dispassionate application of the law? But then, the quiet voice of resolve, refined by years of fighting for the marginalized, asserted itself. She thought about everything they put her through, the public humiliation, the cold cell, the baseless charges. And then she thought about the woman at the park, Maya, holding up her phone. She thought about the endless emails and calls from strangers sharing their own stories of being silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to show what real justice looked like, untainted by prejudice or personal vendetta. An opportunity to not just fight for justice, but to dispense it. This was the universe offering a twist on her fight. A chance to define justice on her own terms, from the very seat of authority. The courtroom on the appointed day was buzzing with quiet murmurs as people filed in, finding their seats. The case on the docket was nothing particularly high profile, an internal misconduct hearing involving 2 officers accused of excessive force in an unrelated incident. To most, it was just another day in the justice system, a routine disciplinary measure. Officer Miller and Officer Davis sat at the defendant's table, wearing their uniforms like armor. They leaned toward each other, speaking in low tones, their expressions indifferent, almost bored. To them this was routine, another hurdle to clear, another inconvenient case to brush aside. They had no idea the world was about to shift beneath their feet, not just for them, but for the very system they represented. Then, the door to the judge's chambers opened, and the room fell silent. Evelyn stepped onto the bench, her black robe flowing behind her like a tide. She moved with purpose, her expression calm yet commanding, every inch the seasoned legal professional she was. As she took her seat, her gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept across the courtroom, finally settling on the defendant. The reaction was immediate, visceral, Officer Miller's face drained of color, his eyes widening in raw shock, a flicker of pure disbelief. Officer Davis shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as he struggled to process what he was seeing. It was her, the woman they had humiliated and arrested at the park, the very woman who had refused to break, who had stared them down with quiet defiance. The tables had not just turned, they had been completely upended. Evelyn allowed a brief, silent pause, letting the full weight of the moment settle over the room, over the defendants, over herself. Then, in a clear, steady voice that belied the storm of personal history raging within her, she began the proceedings. This court is now in session. Please be seated. Miller and Davis sat stiffly, their composure faltering. Miller whispered something to their lawyer, who nodded, but kept his focus intently on Evelyn, a new tension etched on his face. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt the undeniable upper hand. But she knew this wasn't about revenge. Her job as a judge demanded impartiality, and she would uphold that standard, even as the irony of the situation wasn't lost on her or on anyone else in the room. The fight wasn't over. It had just taken a spectacularly unexpected detour, a profound lesson in the unexpected pathways of justice. The path forward was clear, yet fraught with unspoken challenges. The next chapter would demand not just legal acumen, but a deeper, unwavering commitment to the principles she had always championed. The air in the courtroom on the second day was thick with anticipation, palpable and humming with a quiet energy that even Evelyn, seated on the bench, could feel. News of the unforeseen twist had spread like wildfire, drawing a larger crowd than usual for a misconduct hearing. Some were there out of curiosity, drawn by the irresistible drama of the situation. Others, the faces Evelyn recognized from community meetings and supportive emails, were there to silently bear witness, to support Evelyn, even though they knew her role as the judge meant she couldn't show favoritism. Evelyn entered with the same calm, composed demeanor as the day before, her black robe flowing behind her, a symbol of the immense responsibility she carried. The attorneys wasted no time, diving immediately into their arguments. The prosecutor methodically laid out the evidence against Officers Miller and Davis, presenting testimony from the victim of the unrelated excessive force incident. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, his voice firm, "the officers' actions were not just a lapse in judgment, they were a blatant abuse of power. Their behavior reflects a pattern of disregard for the very people they are sworn to protect." Evelyn nodded, taking in every word, her pen gliding across her notepad. Her focus was unshakable, even as the defendants shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. She was keenly aware of their presence, but her commitment to justice transcended personal history. The defense attorney rose to counter, his tone measured but strained, clearly battling the unexpected shadow cast by the presiding judge. "Your Honor," he argued, "while we acknowledge the incident in question, we argue that the situation escalated due to factors beyond the officers' control. Their intent was not malicious, and we believe this case lacks sufficient grounds for punitive measures." As the arguments continued, Evelyn couldn't ignore the chilling parallels between this case and her own experience. The excuses, the justifications, it was all too familiar, the classic playbook of denying accountability. Yet, she pushed her personal feelings aside, determined to let the facts and only the facts guide her. This wasn't about her vindication. It was about Leo, the young man whose voice was about to be heard. When it was time for witness cross-examinations, the tension in the room deepened. The prosecutor called the victim to the stand, a young man named Leo. His voice trembled as he recounted the terrifying night he was tackled to the ground by Officers Miller and Davis during a routine traffic stop. "They didn't give me a chance to explain," Leo said, his eyes darting nervously between the attorneys and the two officers. "It felt like they decided I was guilty before I even opened my mouth." The prosecutor pressed further. And did you resist their orders at any point? No, Leo replied firmly, his voice gaining a touch of defiance. I was scared, but I did everything they said. It didn't matter, they had already made up their minds. The room was silent, hanging on every word. The defense attorney stood to cross-examine, attempting to poke holes in Leo's testimony, questioning his memory, and suggesting he might have misinterpreted the officer's actions. But the young man, despite his fear, held his ground, his quiet conviction cutting through the legal jargon. Evelyn watched intently, her expression unreadable, but inside she was drawing sharp comparisons. Leo's calm demeanor, his desperate attempts to comply, they mirrored her own desperate composure in Riverbend Park. This wasn't just another case, it was a reflection, a stark reminder of the systemic issues she was now incredibly tasked with judging. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The defendants were called to testify. Officer Miller was the first to take the stand. He glanced nervously at Evelyn as he swore the oath, his voice shaky as he answered the prosecutor's questions. Officer Miller, the prosecutor began, you've been accused of using excessive force in this incident. Can you explain your actions that night? Miller hesitated, his gaze darting toward Davis before answering. I thought the situation was escalating. I made a judgment call. And do you believe your actions were justified? Miller shifted in his seat. At the time, yes, but looking back, I could have handled it differently. The prosecutor pressed on, relentless. Handled it differently how? By not tackling an unarmed, compliant individual to the ground? Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence spoke volume. When it was Officer Davis's turn to testify, his demeanor was similarly strained. His attempts to justify his actions only deepened the prosecutor's case, highlighting the officer's inability to take accountability, to truly grasp the harm they had inflicted. Evelyn listened closely, her face betraying no emotion, but inside she felt a mixture of frustration and a surprising flicker of pity. These men had been given immense authority, yet they wielded it recklessly, leaving a trail of harm in their wake, oblivious to the consequences of their arrogance. As the day wore on, it became clear that the evidence against the officers was overwhelming. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful, urging the court to set a precedent that abuse of power would not be tolerated in Willow Creek. When the defense delivered its closing statement, it was clear they were grasping at straws, their arguments lacking conviction. Even Miller and Davis seemed resigned to the likely outcome. Evelyn adjourned the hearing, her voice steady as she announced that a ruling would be delivered the following week. Her gavel struck with a finality that echoed through the tense courtroom. As the room emptied, Miller and Davis lingered near the exit, their faces pale and drawn. For the first time, they seemed to truly grasp the gravity of their actions and the reality of what awaited them. But for Evelyn, the real challenge wasn't in the irony of the moment, or even in the looming verdict. It was in the decisions that would follow, the hope that this one instance of justice could truly prevail and spark a much-needed change. The scales of justice were now truly in her hands, and the weight of that responsibility was immense, preparing her for the final, most impactful act. A week later, the courtroom was hushed, almost reverent, as Evelyn entered to deliver her ruling. Every seat was filled, the tension almost tangible, a thick, expectant silence hanging in the air. Reporters lined the back wall, their pens poised to capture every word. This was no longer just a case about two officers. It had become a symbol of a larger fight for justice and accountability, echoing far beyond the walls of Willow Creek. Evelyn's voice was calm, yet firm, resonating with a quiet authority that commanded attention. The role of law enforcement, she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her, is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When those entrusted with this profound responsibility abuse their power, It erodes public trust and causes harm far beyond the immediate victim. This case has laid bare the consequences of such actions. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, resting momentarily on Miller and Davis at the defense table, their heads bowed. The weight of her words was unmistakable. The evidence presented has demonstrated that Officers Miller and Davis acted with unnecessary force, disregarding the protocols they were sworn to uphold. Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering. Their actions were not only unjustified, but indicative of a troubling pattern that must be addressed. She then outlined the consequences: mandatory suspension without pay, participation in extensive retraining programs focused on de-escalation and implicit bias, and a formal disciplinary record that would follow them. The ruling was firm but fair, striking a careful balance between accountability and the crucial opportunity for reform. When she finished, Evelyn closed the case with a decisive gavel strike. "This court is adjourned." The officers stood, their expressions somber as they prepared to leave, the weight of the verdict pressing down on them. Before exiting, Miller hesitated. He turned to Evelyn, his face pale, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely audible, a whisper of regret. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to undo the harm, Evelyn knew, but it was a start. She nodded, acknowledging his words without offering absolution. True change, she understood, would come through actions, not just apologies. As the courtroom emptied, Evelyn remained seated at her bench, taking a moment to reflect. She had seen justice served, not just for Leo, but as a statement for the community. Yet, the victory felt bittersweet. For every case like this that found resolution, countless others went unspoken, unresolved, festering in the shadows. She knew her fight wasn't over. Later that evening, Evelyn attended a community meeting at the Willow Creek Recreation Center. The room was filled with people eager to share their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. As she listened, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. One older woman, her eyes glistening with emotion, approached Evelyn after the meeting, gripping her hand tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "What you did in that courtroom, it means the world to us. It gives us hope." Evelyn smiled softly. "This is just the beginning. We have so much more work to do." The following weeks saw meaningful conversations blossom between community leaders, law enforcement, and local activists. Evelyn, now more than ever, used her platform to advocate for sweeping reforms. She championed initiatives like mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent civilian review boards to investigate misconduct, and comprehensive bias training integrated into police academy curricula. The case had sparked a ripple effect, not just in Willow Creek, but across the state. People began demanding change, pushing for policies that prioritized fairness and equality. This wasn't just a local victory. It was a testament to the power of one person's unwavering resolve to inspire collective action. For Evelyn, the journey wasn't about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't have to endure what she had. It was about turning a moment of profound injustice into a catalyst for systemic improvement. The fight for justice was ongoing, a long and arduous marathon. But moments like this reminded her that change, though often painstakingly slow, was indeed possible. As she stood on the steps of the courthouse one afternoon, watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful rally, their voices strong and clear, she felt a profound sense of hope. The system wasn't perfect, she knew, but with enough voices, enough unwavering will, it could be pushed, inch by painstaking inch, toward progress. And that, she thought, watching the determined faces of the next generation, is the kind of justice worth fighting for. If you believe in the power of accountability and change, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire action and reflection. Let's work together to make the world a fairer place, one story, one step, one act of courage at a time.